And we're back with another episode of Inside the War Room. Ryan Ray here. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Now, this podcast is kind of a weird one. Let me give a quick backstory here. I am on the board of advisors for the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S.-China Relations. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Ryan, how did they get you on? They've got me mistaken with another Ryan Ray, okay? But our last call, we have a quarterly call, I think it is, or 2 calls ago maybe. A gentleman reached out and said, "Hey, I saw you on the call. Let's chat on LinkedIn." I said, "Okay, that name sounds familiar." And I went and looked, and sure enough, I'd seen he had a book on Amazon that I had purchased like 2 years ago on international business, but I never read the book, which made it kind of awkward. So there was a step in the right direction. That I had bought the book, but I hadn't read the book. So then you had the pressure to read the book. But anyways, so that's led up to this conversation today with a real China expert who is Tyler Johnson. Tyler, thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you doing today?
Hey, Ryan, I'm doing wonderful, man. Thanks for having me here. And I don't know if I'm an expert at anything, really. The longer I live and the more hours I'm awake here, it seems that I'm not an expert at much.
Well, tell everybody really quick about the book, the inspiration for the book, and kind of why you were in China and Asia to write the book.
Yeah. Let me just I'll give some background. And again, Thanks for having me on this, and I really do appreciate it. I'll give you some background. So I spent 21 years at Dell, and 10 of those years I lived in China. So I lived in Shanghai from 2005 to 2015. I've always been in the tech sector, hardware, software, you name it, and had the chance in 2005 to go live in China and work in China for Dell, and it was a unique opportunity to take the family over there. It was supposed to be 2 years and ended up being 10 years. So it was a unique experience, and I tried to put forth my experience and some of the lessons that I learned in a book that I wrote, which was published in 2019, called "The Way of the Laowai." And the way of the Laowai means foreigner in Chinese, and so it's about 8 lessons that I learned at really interacting and doing business with different cultures, and that was the key point. So I've got 3 kids, and one of them was born in Shanghai, which is kind of cool. And then my 2 daughters both speak and write Mandarin. So they grew up in elementary school doing dictation and doing all that cool stuff and in the schools there to actually write and read it. So blonde hair, blue eyes, and they're rattling off a cool language.
It's funny you say that. I'll say the person's name off air with someone we both know, and I was having lunch with them the other day. I know they speak Mandarin, and we're at a Chinese restaurant, kind of an authentic Chinese restaurant, and there's something going on, and he starts speaking Mandarin. And it just felt weird because it's not something that you see every day. You see some people, especially in Texas, kind of mumble through a little bit of Spanish or something like that, and but you don't see many Americans that can speak much Mandarin, much less borderline fluent Mandarin. So when you see it, it's kind of one of those. It's like when the John Cena video came out the other day. You're like, wait, is this being dubbed over his real voice? Like,
it's weird.
Mandarin.
Yeah, it's one of the hardest languages, if not the hardest language to learn. And so, learning a language, they say, is much easier as a kid. And right. Before you're 5 or 6 years old, if you can pick up a language during those early years, it's much easier for you. So anyway, my kids have the benefit of knowing that going forward. And it was funny because we were walking on the beach. We were on vacation in Hawaii, and I was walking on the beach with my eldest daughter, and there were some Chinese that were there, and they were speaking Chinese, and we walked past, and she goes, "Dad, I can just pick up everything that they just said. It's a pretty unique thing." And, it's just something that is ingrained in your head as you go. And anyway, that's the premise of cultural transformation and integration and that kind of stuff. So that's what I tried to write about in the book.
You talked about this story where the executives come over and there's a talk about a toll booth and how they perceive that, but there's other things that the executives kind of were dealing with. And what struck me was when I first went to South Africa, which is I've been internationally, but not for business. South Africa was my first international kind of business trip. Um, I remember going down there with these preconceived notions of what I thought might be down there. Most
Sure.
of that being blown away, and then
Yeah.
being confused by all the stuff that I didn't understand that they had, and then going, "Well, if you have this, why don't you have this? Like that doesn't make sense." And
Yeah.
it just I was closer to the Dell executive than I was you my first
Yeah.
time in South Africa, and I wasn't trying to go with ill intent. It's just you get down there and you're like, okay, listen, okay, it's an emerging market, and you get down there, and you get on this interstate, and you're like, wow, look at these roads. These are impressive. And then
Yeah.
you go 10 miles and you're like, wait, how do you have that? But you can't get it. It's really, if you're trying to observe other cultures outside the US, it really kind of, I don't mess with your head, but it's hard for us to figure out because, especially in an emerging market, in China, uh, they're not fully. If you go outside the big cities, right, they have a lot, a lot of emerging markets that are still happening. But you go international, into emerging markets, it's really tough for the American to kind of understand what's going on and why certain progress had been made. I thought your book did a good job of capturing that.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think I would highly recommend for anybody if they get an opportunity to live overseas and integrate into a different culture, it'll certainly change your perspective and change the way you see the world. Which I think is very fortunate. And I'll go back to my kids, right? My kids have a view of the world which is much different than others that haven't lived abroad. They're more accepting. They are more aware of what goes on. They don't question things as much, right? About different cultures. They're more aware. But I'll go back to your point, right? It's you don't know until you're integrated into it, and being away from the country for so long, you forget what happens in the United States. And I had a tough time coming back to the United States and integrating into the society back in the United States because a lot of the functionality and the ease of use and just options and all of this ease of comfort didn't exist in some of the places that I lived. And so I had a tough time understanding why you needed 100 different brands of peanut butter when in some countries you either can't get peanut butter or you only get one brand, and if it's on the shelf you grab it, right? So
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up because that struck me is that I read that and I thought, okay, that's interesting because here on some level, a function of capitalism is that you have 100 brands of peanut butter, right?
yeah.
And so, but there's also the question is, do you need 100 brands of peanut butter? And so I read that in the book, and I think it was peanut butter and cereals with the two things you brought
Yeah.
up. It's like, okay, that's an interesting point because capitalism produces all this stuff, but then if you're coming from the outside perspective to capitalism, you're like, well, why do you need all this? You're like, well, because capitalism. And
Yeah.
it was just kind of an interesting dynamic, kind of reading the book and thinking about that because we kind of take it for granted, but once you're on the other side of the coin, you're probably going, yeah, why do you need so much? Like, well, that's just what capitalism produces sometimes.
Yeah, and it leads you to the next point, which is as we create and we have entrepreneurs and new companies and innovation and stuff like that, are we creating things that are actually relevant, that are
Mm.
solving problems,
Right,
or are we just creating things that are a waste of money for
right,
people? And so you get to a point now where you really want to see, oh God, does this really have functional use? If you go to the DMV in the United States, right, it's a mess, right?
right.
It takes forever, right? You don't need all those steps. You can automate that, but nobody's focused on that. They're focused on the color of emojis and what type of emojis are out there, right?
Right. Well, and that's the thing is that you have the market creates things, and some things turn out to be very beneficial, some don't. It's kind of hard to evaluate, um, you know, in the moment what actually will lead to the next step, and what is just going to be discarded. The other thing you talk about stories. I've got two stories that I'll share with you, and I don't think I've ever shared publicly, but I've told people. Kind of my favorite stories internationally, and I have not spent nearly as much time overseas as you have. I go for trips, not lengthy stays like you do. They both come from Zambia, and you talk about shaping your perspective and how you view the world. I love to fish, and so when I was in Zambia, I want to go fishing, and so I got to go. I actually got to go on my birthday. It's pretty cool, and I was staying at one resort, and the conference was at a different resort, so I had to take like a taxi back and forth. And I was talking to the taxi about fishing, and I said, what's it like this time of year? It's in June. This pretty much this time a few years back, and so we're going back and forth. And I said, I love freshwater fishing. I said, but I really love fishing in the ocean.
Yeah.
And the driver said to me, the ocean, that's got salt water in it, right? Serious as it could be. And I was like, I kind of almost laughed at him. And then I realized, wait. From his perspective, the ocean is so far away, so far removed that what's in the ocean is not relevant to his life.
Mhm.
That is a different worldview than you will come across in the U.S. Now, you're not going to have everyone's a marine biologist, but that perspective of not even really thinking about the ocean being it has salt water, right? Like having to process this. And I'm not, again, it's not a negative judgment. It's just different. It's like it was like jarring. Like, whoa, how could you? Well, it's not relevant to him, and that was
Mhm.
stunning. And the second thing was at the resort. Outside the resort, on the front gate was a national park, so you couldn't go out at night because the animals were out there. And the back was the river, so they get the crocodiles and hippos and stuff you had to watch out for. So they kind of liked you staying close by at night. And
Yeah.
they had these guards posted outside the doors, like every 7 or 8 doors. And I remember walking up to one of the guys. I said, "Okay, hey, so what are y'all doing?
Yeah.
What's going on here?" And he said, "We're protecting you from the people who want to destroy you." I said, "Okay, I'm going to my room now."
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's those type of stories that you get, that it just changes your perspective. And again, like I can't imagine growing up, but talking to people and hearing how someone who wants to destroy you, like that's a strong word, and that's what he said. Destroy. It didn't say hurt. It didn't say kill. Destroy. It's like, oh, okay,
Mhm.
I'm going in for the night. So I think Americans sometimes struggle um, to work with other cultures because it's that little nuance that you have a guy who doesn't think about the ocean being a saltwater a body of salt water. It's just not relevant to him. Like
Yeah.
that's a different mentality, a different worldview.
It's a completely different worldview, and one of the recommendations that I put forth in the book is that we should have rotations for Americans, right? To rotate to different countries across the world. And I know there's programs for that and stuff like that, but maybe you make it mandatory for people to go out, and maybe that'll change people's perspective on what they have, what's important, what their priorities are, what they want to do in life, what they create, what they innovate. All of these things impact. And I think it helps, point the priorities on where we should spend our time and our energy, because we have a tendency here to spend our time on things that maybe aren't relevant.
Well,
As
you have that, but you also have when I was going back to South Africa the first time I was there, I went to Eskom, which is the big power company, and I was looking at some of their GIS technology, and it was more advanced than anything. I'm not saying that it was more advanced than anything in the U.S., but anything I had seen in the U.S. in the sector that I worked in, and they had some technology, and they turned out they'd paid Esri to build the script for them and all this stuff, and it was like, wow, man. Esri should box this up and sell it in the U.S. because this is fantastic. Like, I can't believe you guys have this down here, and in the U.S. we'd pay tens of thousands of dollars for this kind of software. It's crazy,
Yeah.
right? Um, and so when you think about going to work in that country, you would think that you're going to take that program down there to them to help them out, right?
Of
And they
course.
got the better than you got. And you told a story in the book that was kind of a larger scale than that about
Yeah.
you went in, I think it was a banking software or something, and
Yeah.
you guys roll up in there, and they're like, "Yeah, sorry, buddy."
Yeah, we do more transaction. The story was, they do more transactions in one province than the whole United States does, right? And we just didn't have technology and a system to do that, and to wrap your head around the how large that is and how big that is so important, for people to understand. But it shifts your opportunity focus, and it shifts you into, I want to start something. I want to create something. And that's why I left Dell and I got into the entrepreneurial world, because I wanted to go create something. And you have that mindset in your mind, and you want to take it somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. So yep. What was it like from your perspective working for Dell? And I would imagine if you worked for Dell back in the day, Dell was a big company, a lot of prestige. You're the big dog in China for Dell, and you go in there, and they're like, "Sorry, bud." Like,
Yeah.
I mean, did it take some adjustment to the pride, I guess you might say, to deal with that, because I can imagine just thinking Dell has a lot of solutions, and they did.
Yeah, you go through phases as a personally and professionally, right? And so these phases are kind of you come in and you have this big ego and you think you know everything, and it keeps going up, and you know more and more and more, or you think you know, and then you get it put into situations where you really don't know, and
Right.
you know, you lose face of some kind, and then that starts to go down, and you start to gain knowledge of the country, the culture, how it works. Your mind shifts, the perspective changes, and
Mhm.
then you realize you don't know anything, right? And you have to actually start from ground zero to build your knowledge up. And that's why, you know, at the beginning when I was talking about an expert, well, hell, the longer you're around, you realize that, oh
Yeah.
shit, I don't know
Right.
anything here,
Yeah.
right?
Don't know anything. Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Agreed. Agreed. And it's funny because um, when like you watch like a geopolitical expert talk about some stuff, and we had a geopolitical expert on one of my shows one time, and he come on talking about oil and gas, and you start listening to him, you're like, you don't know, like you don't, I'm not an oil and gas expert by any stretch of imagination, but I knew what he was saying was wrong, and I
Yeah,
was like, wow, you don't understand the oil and gas industry. Do you understand, India or China or whatever? Because you've got this all wrong. And he was talking about America's old dominance and whatever. Anyways, his point was wrong, and I just remember going, golly,
yeah.
this is,
I'll, I'll tell you one of the things that really shifted my mindset, though, is the first 5 years that I was there, I was considered an expat. So I was a U.S. employee
Mhm.
that was based there, paid in U.S. dollars. And halfway through my tenure, I transferred to a local contract, which means that I was a local hired foreign national. Okay. And so many people don't realize what that is. That means that I'm paid in renminbi, the local currency.
Right.
My health care is provided locally. I'm on the pension fund for local, right? And so everything is localized for me. I'm no longer a U.S. employee, and when I leave China, I don't have insurance in other parts of the world and things like that. And so I was in the system then, right? As close as I could be to the system without being, a naturalized citizen of some kind. And so why that matters is because once you're in that system, you realize how inefficient or efficient it is, right? And you realize where the tax breaks are, because I had to pay local tax, right? So as the government shifted priorities of where they wanted people to spend their money, they gave you discounts in your taxes
Right.
on where you wanted to go, and it was real time, right? So the tax system there is monthly, right? So if I didn't submit my receipts every month, I couldn't go back and get a discount on that, right? And so when I submitted taxes for the end of the year, it was a one-page document, one page, that's it. And
Mhm.
if I compare it, because I'm a US citizen, I
Right.
had to also submit that in the United States. That same equivalent information was 76 pages in the United States. And so that right there, the comparison between the two just
Right.
led me to believe, holy crap, man, have we overcomplicated this a little bit? We can simplify this a little bit more.
Well, yeah, yes. I mean, we can spend a lot of time on the U.S. tax code if you want to go there. So, yes,
Yeah.
yes, sir. And maybe for folks who don't know, to my knowledge, there is no way for you to be a naturalized citizen in China. So you were you as close as you could be, or is there some path that I'm not aware of? Because go ahead.
There isn't, right. You have to renounce. You can't have dual citizenship.
Right.
So as a U.S. my son was born there, so he just because he was born there doesn't mean that he's a citizen of China. Many people think that, right? But his birth certificate is Chinese, right?
Oh,
So when we go register him for things, we have to take this Chinese thing, and they in the U.S. and they think that it's fake, right? They
yeah.
they don't. They're like, what are you talking about here, guys? But you're absolutely correct. You can't have dual citizenship, but there you can have a ID card, a localized ID card for a foreigner. So they do allow you to do that, and the government will sign off on that. And once you have an ID card, it's like a license, right? It's like a driver's license in the U.S. You can go through the local lines as you come into the country or as you get services and stuff like that.
Yeah, and
There is a ways to do it.
So to your point about, one of the things I've been talking about recently is this kind of idea in the West that we look to China, and we're whether you think we're in a Cold War or a competition or whatever term you want to put to them. I have a bit of a concern that from the U.S. perspective, we look at what China has done and we don't nuance out the pros and the cons, right? And so, if you look at when you go to China now, if you want to get a taxi, don't take out currency. Hold your phone up with your oh gosh, what's the app? The WeChat or whatever that this
Yeah,
kind of, show that you got the scanner thing, scan it
yeah,
because they're not going to take the currency. And on a lot of ways, that's really efficient because you don't have hard currency or a credit card. It's just on your phone. Also, there's drawbacks to that because now the government, if they want to crack down on people, which they do in China, they have a way. They just right there on your phone. How do you balance out trying to explain your perception of the good in China, which they've done a lot of good? They've taken, depending on who you believe, 400 to 800 million people out of poverty over the last 40 years. They do a lot of bad too. So, how do you advise people in the West on how to view things they see in China?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and it's ongoing. I believe I don't know if there's one right answer to it, but there's a lot of positive. There's a ton of positive that has happened, and there's a ton of benefit that everybody can gain from what has been done over the last 20, 30 years. And I think both countries have helped each other out in certain ways, right? I can recall, being there during those boom years, and being a part of Dell on what we were doing. We were helping establish the infrastructure of the future technology companies that are there today. So you look at the Tencents, the Alibabas, the NetEases, all of these were established and helped through the hardware that was there, or a custom build hardware that we helped create, right? How do you compare between the good and the bad? Yeah, you have to know as a company what you're getting into. And the only way to know that is to understand the history, understand corporations or companies that have done business there, why they're doing business and why they want to go there. And so you've got to truly understand what you're getting into before you jump into the boat, and know that there's corruption, right? There's ethics issues. There's all sorts of stuff that aren't equivalent to what Americans are used to, or maybe even what the developed world is used to. But in some people's eyes, what's the definition of corruption, right? For us, right, and maybe a good comparison is lobbyists in the United States, right? We call that legal, right? Well, in China, they have lobbyists, right? You pay somebody to have access and to have influence, right? What's the difference between that and what we do in the US? We've created laws and rules and regulations around all of that stuff. But if you compare them identical and you don't put tags on them, or you don't put the country of the top of it, it could look very similar, right?
Right.
It's just different. Now, there are differences in liberty, freedoms, free speech, all of these things. And, those are choices that people have to make, whether you're doing business or whether you're personal, and where you stand. And you need to draw the line of what you get involved in and what you don't get involved in.
Yeah. And, on the business side of things, one of the things that it seems to me, and I'm curious your perspective, is that the people who went to China, the early adopters of China, to use that term, they went in, and I guess I'm talking like Volkswagen, something, way back when, they went in, and I think that they believed that they were about to get a huge advantage. They're going to China, they're getting cheap labor, and there's no way these Chinese will ever come and catch up with us.
Sure.
And so they allowed a lot of things to happen that they could have nipped in the bud years ago.
Sure.
They didn't. And so now a lot of the complaints about business in China as a result of companies who are making money hand over fist.
Yeah.
And you saw this, I think, in Germany last year. The Germans were complaining that the Chinese were stealing IP or whatever it was. And, Germany's kind of in a tough spot because they need to import from China. But I was looking at some of the companies, and their complaints were more or less that now the Chinese are competing with us outside of China. And I thought, well, how are they doing that? Like, let's just stop thinking about that. If you're saying that you're in China, and now the company that's in China that you were partnering with is completely outside China. They didn't just wake up one day and go, "Oh, hey, guess what? We have all your stuff and we're leaving you." This was a slow process that you allowed to happen. I'm not trying to take a moral stance on who's right and wrong. I'm more saying that it feels like the West allowed a lot of stuff to happen, and now they're kind of complaining that they didn't handle it the right way because
Sure.
China has caught up with them under the rules that everyone agreed to play by.
Yeah, sure. So money clouds a lot of things, and it makes people do things that maybe they shouldn't do, right? And companies are included in that. And when you have a lot of these companies, multinationals that are listed on exchanges, or they have a lot of investors, those drive a lot of what people do. And the lure of the money and the attraction of the big markets and the big volumes certainly can cloud decision making on what you do and what you don't do, and I saw firsthand that happen every single time. I can't tell you how many times that I've heard China say they're going to open their financial system. Right, it's been 20 years, right, and they continue to say the same thing, but yet they won't allow foreign financial firms to come in and own more than a certain percentage.
Right.
The same for the automobile, right? The same for various industries that they have. And so they keep saying that and keep giving the carrots out there. Money clouds a lot of stuff, and it clouded a lot of decisions that were made. And I think everybody, you're absolutely right, thought that it would turn, right? And it would be played out properly, and that there would be some rule of law around, or some sort of penalties. But it is what it is. It's competition, and I think people have caught on to it now, or at least there's more of an awareness of it. And so let's see what happens off of that awareness. Some businesses may choose to get out of China. They may choose to change how they do business. They may choose to develop products that are localized versus the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you a story. I'll give you a great story, because I worked with a lot of these companies, Laowai in particular. It was one of my largest customers in China at the time, right? And we helped to build a customized product that had DC power on it for emerging markets. So you could argue, right? And other companies did the same thing. HPE, IBM, all of these companies developed unique products that helped Huawei get into emerging markets across the world, because the developed world had a tough time getting into emerging markets for price competition, labor competition, all of these things, right? But China knew this quite well, and they knew how to do this. Right. So by partnering with them and creating all of that stuff, it was beneficial to both sides. We got heavy volume on it, and they got into markets that they couldn't. So at the time, right, those were good, sound business decisions. And if you're in the sales side of the house, you're not thinking of next year, right? You're thinking, how are you going to make your number
Yes, that's right.
this year? And that's what drove a lot of the decisions that you have. And, you had companies like Siemens. Siemens had 76, 78 joint ventures all across China. They were developing products for all over the world. They were developing for localization. And so these companies, I think, are aware. They're certainly aware of it. I think they're trying to change how they do things, but the volumes are so high in these countries, that in China, that it's hard to turn your back to it. It is extremely hard. So what do? I don't know what the right answer is for some of these companies. That's the quadrant, right?
Well, yes. So you have the how do they solve it, which is part of it. I think for me, the when I hear, maybe, I don't know if whining is the right term, the complaining, or kind of how the posturing is at the level, I'm like, okay, I'm just not going to give you guys the free pass because of what you did in the past. Because if you thought it was the right decision at the time, good for you. I'm not mad at you. If you thought it was the right decision, but you also kind of not at your level, maybe with the CEO level, well, listen, we can do this, and our competitors. I'm not necessarily mad at what they did. I'm more frustrated that, hey, before we start getting out here and talking about this stuff, what's the plausible deniability, like for some of the weaker stuff, like, so I just, I got a little bit of a leery eye, I guess, is my thing with some of that. And that's not to say these companies shouldn't be in China. I'm a free market guy. So if you want to go to China and work, listen, I've said before, I'll say, you might not like this, but I'm for working with North Korea, Iran, wherever. I'm a free market guy. So I don't believe in sanctions or any of that stuff. I think all that's just usually targets and hurts the people who can't do anything about it. So just so we're clear, I'm not against people working with China. And I think that's it. To your point, though, you see with Hollywood right now, they're really struggling because the Chinese market is so robust, and they
Yeah.
kind of have tried to tailor their product to work for U.S. and China. And my thought is that they're going to have to either A, make movies that are for the Chinese market and then movies for the U.S. market, or B, they're going to end up probably just having to lower their budget so much because it just won't work. And why I don't understand what would be the problem with Hollywood saying, listen, China's a huge market. We're gonna make movies just for them. Just like you make a rom com. A rom com's not for me. Make a
Yeah.
movie for China. What do I care?
Yeah, I think a lot of this has to do with awareness on what's going on beneath the surface and what's going on behind the scenes, and this blind trust that things will work out has to go away. And so the movie theater and Hollywood and stuff, right? They're in a bad situation, right? But they could stand up, just like the sports teams could stand up,
Sure.
and they certainly don't need to bend to a foreign government. That is kind of ridiculous to me. They need to stand up, and yeah, they're going to lose money, sure, but it'll get picked up somewhere else over time. And it's that short-term versus long-term view of the world and where things go, because things will balance out. Even though the volume is there. And you're right, you can make localized offerings and localized solutions to cater towards those markets, but it's hard to do. And sometimes people don't want to do the hard thing. They want to do the easy thing.
Yeah. So okay, I hear what you're saying about the movie. I don't know. I'm torn, and here's why. I don't. First off, most U.S. consumers don't realize that movies are censored in a lot of countries all over the world, not just China. So we're censoring movies in Saudi Arabia or India or wherever. So it's not uncommon for Hollywood to adapt a movie somewhat for a localized thing. With the China, it's kind of more of an extreme because you can't mention Taiwan or you can't even take it. I think the Top Gun movie that took off a flag off a jacket. So it's kind of on steroids. And so we already do it. So I hate to single out and say, well, you have to stand up to China, because I don't know if they should have to stand up to everyone. And at the same token, Marriott or whoever, they won't list Taiwan as a destination on their website, even though they have hotels there. So
It'd kill their business. It'd kill the stock, right?
Right.
So they're already so invested in this thing that you're stuck, right? So if
Right.
I'm a CEO of that company, yeah, I'm in a tight spot, man, and that
Right.
is a tough decision to make,
Right.
And you've got to have backing behind you, and you've got to be articulate of what your plans are in order to be successful in that. And they got into these situations because they had blind trust, and they thought that things would work out. And
Oh yeah, I don't feel bad for them. I just don't want to say, I don't want to pound on Hollywood too hard and then not be pounding on the hotel chains or the flights or whatever. And anyway, it's as you said, the more you get into China stuff, the more it's like, oh yeah, you got to connect this dot and this dot. You bring up something I want to circle back to, though. You talked about owning and JVs in China. Let's talk about that a little bit, because Tesla, to my knowledge, is the only car company that has a wholly owned plant in China. They're the only ones, right?
Yeah, they remember they threw in billions of dollars in investment to get a piece of the company, right? And so there was a deal that Elon struck with them that is coming back to bite them right now, right? So they have exceeded, I don't know what it is, 25% of global revenue comes from China now. They have the plant that's there. They just announced a couple of days ago that there were 300,000 cars for recall.
It's all the cars, to be clear.
Yeah, it's every car. Now, this is all done. This was all planned, right?
Sure. Right.
So whether people think it's planned or not, it is planned, right? And just like a foreign company coming into the United States, the same thing would probably happen, right? Whoa, you guys are getting too ahead of yourself. Let us control this. This is our country. This is our land. Let us deal with that kind of stuff. Now, Tesla got a deal. They got a deal because he's got a hot technology, right? And they need to supercharge their EV, right? And they want to, and Elon put it in there because there's energy sources that are there. All the raw materials are there, right? So it makes it a little bit easier, right?
Right.
Don't forget, there's transfer going on. There has to be transfer going on.
Right. And so it started, at least the most recent stuff, about a month or two ago, when they said, hey, you're using your technology to spy on our military officials and government officials and stuff. And it was interesting because whether that's true or not, as the American side of things, I wonder how many Americans stopped and go, wait,
spying on us?
They're spying on us. They're spying on us.
Yeah.
I thought sometimes the communist regimes, like the things that they will say, it's like, wait, that's a really good
That's true. Of course. Yeah. But you notice the cycle, right? And so it's a typical pattern that happens, right? And it's not just Tesla, it's many companies that come out. You'll throw out some bad news, right? Or you'll throw out a question. We do it in the US for certain things, right? And so then it leads to PR campaigns and brand campaigns and all of these type of stuff. Well, the same is true there, right? They threw this story out, months ago. Early on, when they were there for Tesla, I think they showed films of cars burning up and stuff like that.
Stuff in the fire in the garage or whatever.
Yeah, something, whether it was real or not, who knows, right? But it's that kind of stuff that gets thrown out because you're getting a little too big for your britches here, and we want you to know who's in control here. And I think it happens everywhere. It happens all over the world, man. In any country, Japan, Australia, you name it, man. It happens all over the place.
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, we can put the tinfoil hats on if you're ready to go down that avenue. I've got some thoughts there too.
Yeah, it did happen with. And an interesting story right now is Didi, right? So Didi is the competitor to Uber here, and Didi goes IPO today, right? I don't know what time they start listing, but they were supposed to go. So they're trying to raise $4 billion here. They're already subscribed here in the U.S. It probably goes on at noon or something, that they're going to start listing at $14 a share. But that's interesting too, because the same type of thing went on when Uber was trying to compete with Didi locally. And so I was there at the time that they were competing, right? And I think the volumes that they were spending on an annual basis were in the billions of dollars to incent people to get onto their platform. And they decided to say, hey, time out here. We're gonna not do this. And so you imagine the stories that were thrown out with Uber, the stories that were thrown out with Didi, and the two sides, right? And the battle. And finally Uber said, we're out of here, right? And Didi say, I'll give you some of our shares. And so in this IPO that's coming out, Uber is gonna make a fortune on this stuff, right? They're gonna make a fortune. But then the question mark becomes, is Didi ready for the world stage? Are they a part of the Belt and Road Initiative? Are they a part of all of these emerging markets? Are they already integrated in there? Do they spy? Are they tracking? Where's that data? I mean, you could go on and on and on about all of these things.
What is we'll separate Didi for a second, but just generally speaking, what is your thoughts on Chinese companies being able to be listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and U.S. companies, U.S. people, U.S. investors being able to invest in them because they do have, government ties and stuff like that? And it's not just Chinese, but it's from China.
Yeah, and so these are my personal views, right? And I invest in these companies, right? So don't get me wrong, I buy stock in these because I know about these companies, but you could question. A lot of them are ADRs, right? A lot of them don't require the same things that are required by U.S. companies in terms of financials or regulations, operations? And that's the question mark, right?
Right.
And then the other question mark is if U.S. investors or people are putting their money in, is there a way for them to be protected in some way if something happens with that company? And so, Alibaba's listed. You get all of these hundreds of Chinese companies that are on there. Do they actually have the protection as an investor in the U.S. if they put their money in there, if something happens to that company? Do we have the legality to go in and investigate these companies if there's wrongdoing, just like we would have the same thing for U.S. companies or European companies or whoever that are listed there? I don't think that we do, right? A lot of these companies that are listed, they're not required to have that, and you have limited protection. And it goes back to awareness. I think a lot of investors are unaware of the protectiveness that they have within these investments, and then the risk that's involved in them. And you see the stories come out all the time of fraudulent financials, right? And I know firsthand that there's two sets of books. There's what you see, and then there's the local ones, right? And the auditing that goes on. There's no
company, like a coffee company that had like no coffee or something that was
Luckin.
Yeah.
That was the name of it. Yeah. They had two sets of books, right? So, I mean, be careful what you're jumping into. I think it's okay if the firms have some way of regulating it. And I don't know if that's in place today. And it goes back to the lure of the money, right? Follow the money. People get excited about strong gains and the ability to make more. Now, the flip side of this is you could say, we're funding, U.S. investors are funding these companies to be successful in other parts of the world. And is that something that we want to go do as individuals or as a country? And is that something that we should be doing?
So, yeah, I would say the way that everything is set up currently, not in my perfect world, is that companies should be listed in the country that they reside in. But you should be able to invest with much more ease in those stock exchanges than you can now, right? Because it's not easy necessarily for U.S. investors to invest outside of the U.S. Because then you would, if you're on there, well, it's a Chinese company because you're in China, or a Japanese company because it's Japan, or whatever. I think that would be the first step, because then the risk is kind of baked into it. You understand it's a different thing. Whereas right now you get on, TD Ameritrade or whatever, you might not do your research. Go, oh, well, Bob said this is a good stock. I go buy it. And you don't understand that risk is there. So that would be the first step. The second thing is the more and I'm big cross-border investment, because the more cross-border investment that happens, I think the potential for war goes away, right? So if we're all investing
where it starts a war.
Well, okay, I'm talking about on the consumer level, not on the big guy level, on the consumer level. And the analogy I always give is if U.S. pension funds invested in Syria, at some refinery in Syria, the next time we dropped a bomb there, they'd be calling up the congressman saying, listen, you're going to cost us a bunch of money. Why are we bombing? Who are we bombing again? Explain this to me. And so going back to the money thing. So the money, I'm not saying it's the best way to develop international relationships, but it does start a process, because if you have financial ties to a country, you want the best for that country. And so I don't know if that's the best way to do it, but under the current setup, it seems that would make the most sense, because then you could understand where the company's based from, and you'd be more willing or more aware of the potential risk, at least, or have the ability to understand that there's risk.
Sure. And you made a point there. You made a point around the currency and the ability to have money transfer all over the place, and that goes. That is the core of a lot of the problems that are going on, especially with China, right? The Chinese renminbi is not fully convertible, right? So you cannot go online and convert into. You can transfer money to renminbi, but you can't convert it backwards,
right?
Okay, so that flow of money is is the problem. And I know this because I have a bank account in China, right? I have a bank account and I can't get it. And I always know when the relations are bad with China because my ATM doesn't work. So they shut it off, right? There's limits on what you can do to get that money out, right? You can convert it as a foreigner. You can convert certain amounts. And if you have the right tax records, you can do all of that, but you have to do it in person. And, it's very cumbersome and it's hard to do, but that flow of money is a big thing, right? And a big trapping. And that goes back to the US dollar being king of the castle, right, across the world, and that's why you see these digital currencies and digital yuan and crypto and the fight that goes on amongst all of that and what that's going to look like. And I don't know what it's going to look like. I'm not a financial analyst by any means or an economist at all, but I mean, you change the rules, you rule the world, right?
That's right. That's right. It's funny because I want to work on I want to write a short book on the digital yuan, crypto, and the dollar, and the battle that's coming. Because make no mistake about it, there is a battle coming. I'm not saying necessarily with guns, but there's a battle coming because China understands this. The U.S. definitely understands this. The U.S.'s allies understand this. This is not just the U.S. is at the top of the heap. And if you look at the Bitcoin stuff, going back to your point about you see these things kind of roll out. Well, a few months ago, India comes out and like, well, we might ban Bitcoin. We're not really sure about that.
Yeah.
At the same time, their prime minister, secretary of finance, I can't remember who it was talking to Janet Yellen.
Yeah.
And she's not a Bitcoin person at all for obvious reasons.
Yeah,
it's like, they just had a call and then this announcement comes out. Now, I don't know if India's going to do anything or not, but then you see that Coinbase, Binance is banned in the UK. So you see these things with countries that are friendly to the US and its status as a reserve currency. On the other hand, you see Iran like, we'll do a 25-year deal with China. We'll do it. We're being sanctioned to death, but we're going to do it. And so that's subverting the dollar, and that's a big deal.
Is. That's a huge deal, right? And so these have been going on for quite a while, right? There's been relationships that have been set up already between Russia and China, and then Russia and Iran and various other groups, and those transactions are happening without conversion into U.S. dollar, and that's part of the battle with Hong Kong too, right? I mean, Hong Kong, their speech and that kind of stuff, but all money flew through Hong Kong, right? All U.S. dollar and all transactions and all convertible. And now you're seeing all of that shift to Singapore and various other parts. And so that disruption is feeling the effects everywhere. What that does to trade and what that does to relationships and business and supply chains, I mean, it has ripple effects everywhere.
Okay, let's got a few minutes left here. Let's talk about just relationships on the international space. Before I went international, someone told me relationships are 10 times as valuable internationally as they are in the U.S. And in fact, if you got a good relationship, the contract is really not, it's important, but not as important as the relationship. Do you agree with that statement?
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it depends on the country that you're dealing with, right? So I think there's a difference between emerging countries and developed countries. I think there are developed countries that have more legal system involved and more process. And
emerging countries, it was what I was referring to. Yes.
Yeah. So emerging countries, absolutely. Relationships are critical to start businesses and to start contracts. And having those relationships is key to getting stuff done. It gives you access, right? It gives you credibility. It gives you potentially funding and money. Right. And you need all of that stuff if you're a foreigner trying to do business in a foreign land, just like somebody would need access if they came to the US, right? They would need somebody to tell them how to do it.
So I'm curious, from my perspective, the thing that I found to be the most effective with my international dealings has been the willingness to go, the willingness to show up and just go to a foreign country and have dinner, go around. It's amazing how much that has separated me from people who I don't have a college degree. So college degrees, MBAs, Harvard graduate, connected, just won't go. But if you go, is that been your experience as well?
Absolutely. I just showing up is 80% of the, I can't tell you how much opportunity that has presented itself just by being there and being a part of it. I'm not an academic, man. I'm a C student, right? I have a psychology degree, right? I have no business degree. I have none of it. I picked psychology because it was the easiest one, right? And so just showing up and being a part of traveling, understanding, being a part of culture, eating with them, speaking, understanding the mannerisms, the symbolism, all of those things are extremely important if you want to do business. And I think the other thing that's important is having patience, right? Americans have a tendency not to have a lot of patience in some way, and maybe it's a generational thing. I don't know. I don't have patience for some things, but others that I do. But I learned the biggest thing that I learned living overseas and doing business overseas is patience.
Patience, because the clock. One of the things, at least with some of my African friends, is they've said, "Well, we want the Americans to come down because y'all work at a faster pace than we do, and we like the way that you kind of keep the schedule and this kind of American drive and stuff like that." But then, in dealing with them on stuff, they're still kind of slow. It's like, well, okay,
Yeah.
I want to speed this up here, guys. It's like, no. It's just a cultural thing where it's just that their clock works differently than my clock does. And it's, to your point at the beginning, it's not a right or wrong thing. It's a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
And to work in those countries and to work with those people, they're not bad people. They have no ill will. It's just, that's just how they go through life. And it's just at a different pace. And on some days I'm very much more envious of them than because it's like, God, that'd be nice to slow play this thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of times, especially meetings in China and across Asia for that matter, it wasn't about the meeting. The meeting was symbolic in nature. And
right.
I think that concept in itself is foreign to Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Americans go to meetings to get stuff done.
That's right.
And in some of these other countries, China included, you're going to the meeting not to get something done because it's already done, right? Yeah. The contract's already done. Right. You don't need to worry about that. You're showing up to snap a picture or save some face or just smile. And that concept is hard for people. And I can't tell you how often I had executives fly in that they didn't understand that at all, and it was a tough concept for them to get.
Yeah, another thing, I have one more thing, and then we'll let you wrap it up with this. Asking questions. What I've learned is that if you go down there like, well, let me tell you, what you guys need to do, that doesn't get you very far. No. But if you go, what's going on here? Or help me understand this, or why is this the way it is, or or whatever the question is, they really. In America, it's explaining stuff is almost kind of a faux pas. But going to a foreign country and asking about the country, you're showing that you care. And doing a little bit of research before you show up goes a long way too. So you're not completely oblivious, But it's stunning that just asking questions, because you're showing that you care, and you should care if you're trying to work in that country, right? Like you should care. And oh, by the way, as you said multiple times, you're not an expert. You won't be an expert, so you need to ask the questions. And I found that it's really weird because you start asking the questions, and the things that you get sometimes aren't exactly what you're asking for, but they illuminate the way they answer the question, or the way they describe something to you, or the way they bring in something that you're like, I don't even. Well, hold on, I don't understand. I asked you about this, and you said this, and then how's this tied in? And they tell you that, and like, oh, and so if you didn't ask, you never would have known.
Yeah, and you're absolutely correct. And asking the right questions in the right way, you have to understand that depending on the country that you're in, because the response that you get or how you ask that can be offensive or not be offensive. And so you need to be careful or aware of those types of things. And it's funny story. I would come back to the U.S. after being away for so long. I would have simplified English when I came back. So I would have basic terminology. You eat here, right? It would be right. That, I would sound like that because you would just have to simplify things a little bit different, because you got to remember, English isn't the first language for most people across Asia. And so understanding the history and the culture. And I tell you what, Ryan, I mean, I didn't I learned more history after I left China because I
Mm-hmm.
was more eager to learn and understand what had just happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I dove into it a little bit further. I wish that I would have started that way, where
Mm-hmm.
I read history and I understood that history and I understood all that stuff at first before I went.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if I would have gotten it, right? Um,
Right, right.
you don't get it until after the fact sometimes.
It's interesting because when we were over there in November of 19, one of our translators, and I hate calling him translator because they were both more than translators, but they were also functioning as translators. They were, anyways. We would ask questions, just as we're riding around the bus, going from place to place. And he would always say, well, in the Ming Dynasty, so and so and so and so, and then in this dynasty, so and so and so and so. And so the joke became when, they would say something. We'd say, well, in the second Ming Dynasty, because we didn't know all the dynasties, so we just second Ming Dynasty. But it was just funny, just because like how they viewed history, which was by these dynasties, and again going back to kind of the comment about the guy with the saltwater. That's just a different way to think about time. A
Sure.
Wait, you're categorizing this as a dynasty. We might say the Obama years, the Trump years, but we probably say the 90s or the 80s or the 70s, right? And that's different because in the 70s a lot of stuff happened, but you're saying here's a dynasty,
Yep.
and I'm categorizing things like that, and so I found that to be quite interesting, fascinating. And since I've been back trying to read about the dynasties and understanding, it's been enlightening to understand that at least some of them think that way. That's helpful.
Yeah, one of the things that opened my mind on just the length of time was the written language, the characters, right? So the characters have been around for 5,000 years, and that
Right.
is traditional characters, right?
Mhm.
There are, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,300 different dialects all across China, right? So you
Mhm.
can imagine the different things that have gone on, but those characters have stayed the same across that whole length of time of 5,000 years. They have simplified Chinese and they have different dialects, but the characters have always stayed the same. So the characters never change. They just tell different stories as the time goes on.
Right.
And so it's an interesting thing. And you're like, holy shit, that's a long time. They've been around for a long time.
Right. Okay. So let's wrap it up with this first. I think me and you both agree. I don't know if you agree about North Korea and Iran, but we both agree that working internationally, working with people internationally, is one of the greatest experiences that you can do. But best things you can do. It's fantastic. For someone who says, okay, my company's domestic. They have no plans to go international. Is sales the best avenue to go international from your perspective? Is it maybe some kind of IT engineering? What are your thoughts on that? Just at a high level, obviously you can't answer the question for everyone, but just thinking through what's the easiest way to go international.
Yeah, I don't know the easiest way. I would say sales is more transferable to many different markets and many different industries. So it's probably easier to do some sort of sales, but it also will make it harder to sell locally.
Right.
Right. So some sort of functionality. But what I guess I'll leave you with this is that you in tomorrow's world, right?
Mhm.
You're going to have a global mindset on
Yeah.
solutions and cultures and how that interacts, right? Because it all interacts together. And if you're creating solutions and you're creating and solving problems, you want to create it for multiple cultures. You don't want to create it for just one. And so having that different perspective and being able to be integrated into a different culture, that's the only way you're going to be able to create something new and invent something new. And that's what the future is all about. And so I'm excited about my children, right, and my
Right.
kids and their ability to impact what the rest of the world is, because they have a green sheet, right, and a blue
Mhm.
ocean that's out there, and their ability to connect with the rest of the world. So if you get an opportunity, take it. If you don't have an opportunity, go create an
Make it, yes.
opportunity. Yeah, go make one, right? Because what doesn't work here
Mhm.
can work in other spots and other parts of the world. And what you'll find is that there is a solution to whatever you're solving in some part of the world today, because there's over 8 billion plus people across the world. And so it's big, and go make it happen. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and consider maybe if you have an advanced degree like a master's or something, maybe an NGO or something like that. I think tank might be an option for you. You get some kind of foot in the door. What you find is the international community is big, broad, diverse, but it's also tightly knit at some points. Like you come across
Yeah.
people like, oh wait, hold on. So okay, where can people find you at? LinkedIn, website? Where do you want to connect with
Yeah,
you?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm highly active on LinkedIn, so they can find me under Tyler Johnson there. The Way of the Laowai. The book is available across all platforms, so Amazon, Google, and if they want to reach out, they can message me on LinkedIn, no problem, or they can email me at tyler@thewayofthelaowai.com.
Okay, we will link to the book, of course, and your LinkedIn for folks who want to do it. Want to connect. Tyler, thank you so much for coming on today.
Man, thanks for having me. This has been great, man. We can talk all day on this, on some of this stuff.
I agree. And for the listeners, thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back. I think we got a show tomorrow, so I'll be back tomorrow.